welcome to today's broadcast of North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of NIC television students, and your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Today's topic is life and politics in the People's Republic of China. That is a country that's often very mysterious to us, and we're very, very fortunate to have a very distinguished and qualified guest that can discuss this very intriguing topic with us. I welcome to the program Dr. Marilyn Levine. She is an assistant professor at Lewis Clark State College in Lewiston, Idaho, in the Division of Social Sciences. Our guest has also taught at a number of other schools in the country, including San Diego State University. Our distinguished guest holds a PhD in history from the University of Chicago. She also holds an MA degree in history from the University of Hawaii, and she received her BA degree in history from San Diego State University. Our guest is also a Phi Beta Kappa. She is published, has a number of publications, and one of her honors is that she is the first foreigner that was granted affiliation status with the Department of Social Sciences in Peking, the People's Republic of China. Dr. Levine, it's a pleasure to have you on our program. We look forward to discussing this intriguing subject.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for the lovely introduction.
I'm also very happy to welcome to the panel a friend of mine, Dr. Rodney Fry, who is an anthropologist. He also is the director of the North Idaho Education Center for Lewis Clark State College, and I shall invite Dr. Fry to commence the questioning.
It's a pleasure being here, Tony. Welcome.
Thank you.
Looking at your distinguished career and activities, I have a general question that I'd like to initiate. You as a young scholar moving into an understanding of Chinese history and politics, maybe you can relate some of the experiences you've had as a scholar, both in France, where many of the important sources of information are housed, as well as in China, and just how you as a scholar go about learning, as a Westerner, learning about this culture.
Well, one of the things that is important is that we oftentimes don't realize that we need to look at not Chinese just as a language that's so difficult to learn, but look at the Chinese first as human beings, and to not think of the language in such an analytical way. For example, when I speak Chinese, I don't think about it as I'm speaking. I just speak it. I don't wonder, well, am I going to make this mistake or that mistake? And I noticed at the University of Chicago, for example, students would come in every morning to class very tensed up about learning the language, and, oh, is the teacher going to say I'm making a big mistake? Actually, it really didn't matter all that much because Chinese are very generous, they're gracious, and they love for you to learn their language, and they won't say anything. It's actually grammatically a very easy language to learn. For example, there are no verb tenses in Chinese, so you don't have to learn he sat, he is sitting, he will sit. You just need to learn one word and you have it all. There's also no gender, not only like French and Spanish where you have la table or something like that. In Chinese, it's all,一个桌子. It's just one word, so there's no masculine, feminine. Not only that, even he or she, there is no he or she in Chinese. So it's tremendously easy, and the grammar, unlike English, is quite consistent. So there are few grammatical structures to learn. There are a limited amount of sounds. So the key thing is once you have and even in the written language, people are often frightened because they see all those complicated characters. Actually, it's a very exciting, if you break down that barrier of feeling that, oh, I'm so unsophisticated, I'm so uncultured, and you just look at the character. It has a pictorial meaning and it has a logical meaning. And once you learn a few of those, about 100 or so, there isn't anything you can't attempt to read or to do. And what we need more of is people to generally approach it that way. So when I go to China, I speak to real people. And when I conduct my interviews or I conduct any kind of a collegial discussion, it's all done in Chinese. Even if I don't understand something, I pursue it, even if I'm placed in a situation. In fact, it was much more frightening for me to go to France than it was to go to China because my Chinese is very fluent, my French is very backwards. So when I went to France, my heart was beating real fast, and I was really frightened, and And I just, by pure chance, ran into a series of coincidences which allowed me to make great strides in the archives. But I went not knowing how to say the word archive, but the French were just lovely to me, and I was very fortunate. But I was actually more frightened to go there than I was to China. China, I feel I could get by anywhere, and that's because fundamentally the people are gracious and generous.
You're very fortunate that you have such a gift and intelligence to learn languages. I understand you've studied 7 languages, and so when you go to a country such as China, you have an advantage to be able to get to speak with the people, know the society much better. I would like for you to share with us, if you would please, something about the characteristic of the Chinese people. From my very limited study of China, I understand that culturally they have some very important principles. For example, I understand that even when they're in a disagreement with you, and particularly if you're a house guest, that they do not show some of their anger, and secondly, that they believe in allowing people to save face. I just use that as an introduction to a very general question: is what are the Chinese people like culturally?
Well, culturally, the Chinese themselves have 5,000 years of culture, which they are very proud of. In fact, the area that I study, Chinese communism in France, it's very interesting because here you figure there's these 1,600 Chinese youth, including Deng Xiaoping and Chen Yi and the 2 future foreign ministers of the PRC, who went to a totally different culture. They were going to France without knowing French, without knowing how to work in a factory, and yet they were going to do it. And it says something to the fact of their sense of cultural strength in their confidence as a people that they win in the first place. And not only that, how they treated the whole experience. Even though the French were looking down on them because they didn't know the language or the technical skills, Chen Yi, as a matter of fact, has who was the second prime minister of China and the People's Republic, he had a great story where he said, I know that I'm stupid, that I don't know French, that I don't know the technical skills, but by gosh, they not only treat me like I'm a Vietnamese, but, which of course France had colonized Vietnam by this time, and they said, but they also treat me as stupid as the Africans. And it's just, of course, this is the future foreign minister of China, so it's a charming anecdote from one sense. It also, I think, indicates this sense of cultural confidence that you see and that you may have observed Chinese who come here. Now, when you're in their home, I really don't notice a whole lot of difference. I notice on the there's this stereotype that the Chinese are quiet, that they never reveal feelings or something like that. On the contrary, I don't think that's true at all. As a matter of fact, one of the shocks for Westerners, both for China and Japan, is how emotional and how much feelings actually are expressed. All you have to do is watch Saturday Night in Taiwan. They have these melodramas which, if you don't break out a whole box of Kleenex and use it by the end, you're just not going to make it. They just cry the whole programs through. So those are the kind of stereotypes that people have that aren't true. I will say that there is more of an opportunity to be conciliatory and to talk out differences in a consensus way. And there is you're correct in the sense of a rather subtle approach to things at times. Rather than, for example, if we give a gift, if I were to bring, you invited me to your home and I brought you a gift, you would say, oh, this is so marvelous, you shouldn't have done it, how nice of you, oh, it's so beautiful, I'll treasure it all my life. The Chinese, on the other hand, they thank you, they'll accept it, and you won't hear another word about it. And at first I was very hurt. I thought, I had, as a matter of fact, gotten some beautiful glass art from the Mount St. Helens ash that's made in these gorgeous colors. And I had this for them, and the professor just, oh, that's very nice, thank you very much, and never said a word about it. 4 months later, I gave a similar thing at a banquet to another professor, and he said, oh, you don't have to tell me, this is the stuff from the earthquake. So they had been telling each other about it, and indeed their reaction is very pragmatic. Rather than fill you back with a bunch of fluttery remarks, their reaction really is to show by action and to actually do nice things for you. Rather than throw back compliments and things. So it's a very sincere culture, and I think we have many surprises to learn. In terms of modern-day People's Republic of China, perhaps you would be interested in just one or two observations that I had that they were surprised. One of them was the role of women. I was real surprised, especially since 1949, how women have changed because, and Chinese lends itself to this because they don't have a masculine feminine, as I mentioned. And when I was traveling in China with Professor Zhu Yuhe, it was extraordinary. Men and women would be traveling together, and no one thought anything of this. People, just says, oh, it's a student-teacher, or oh, it's a student-student. And at one point in time, my own prejudice was shown to me. He said, well, I have this friend in Hangzhou. If we can't find a place to stay, we can be in their home. And he named off this name, Li Qinyao. I was, okay, Li Qinyao. And I'm assuming that Li is a man. And when we got there, we couldn't find a place that would accept me and him, because I was a foreigner. He said, 他不能来，我也不能住在这儿. He wouldn't stay there either. And so he called up this person he hadn't seen in 30 years, and I knew it was going to be this dramatic reconciliation, but it turned out to be a woman. And her husband was at home making a 7-course meal while she was picking us up on the spur of the moment at the train station. So it's very interesting how some of our conceptions are different. And I was surprised at the more egalitarian treatment, at least in the cities, of Chinese women. And those are some stereotypes that we have that weren't so obvious.
Thank you. Dr. Rajni.
Fascinating. Right. Given the current changes that seem to be revolutionizing many of European countries, Eastern European countries, how do you understand the changes going on or perhaps not going on in the People's Republic of China today?
Well, I have a perspective on that's influenced by my research, because I researched the young Deng Xiaoping, who went to Paris in 1919, and he was 16 years old when he went to Paris. Actually, he went in 1920, and he stayed there till 1925. He worked in a Renault factory in Billancourt, and never went to school there. But it's interesting because that's where he adopted his communism. And what I found particularly dismaying was, my book is called The Found Generation, Chinese Communism in Europe. And I find that this is one thing that dismays me, that they took this legacy, especially Deng Xiaoping, who took this legacy that he had of youth in revolt. In fact, he himself was almost expelled from France for cutting the telephone wires in the Paris Chinese legation. So I find it tremendously ironic that he wants to not allow these demonstrations. How I understand it is that these people feel that communism is an ideology not only that they believe in, but the Leninist model, especially of the party and of the idea of discipline, is very, very important. And once you go against those, you have gone against the revolution, which is why they call these people counter-revolutionaries. And part of it's generational. They're trying to hang on to power. They're trying to hang on to the purity of the revolution as they see it. But in terms of, as you bring out, world politics, it's like Merle Goldman just had an article on this, 2 steps, the great leap backward. It's unfortunate that when world trends are becoming different, China is now actually conservative in that sense. It's dismaying, and I find it tragic. I suspect the Chinese do too.
I would like to pursue that, excuse me, a step further. Many of those people that you're describing that were in that period, 1920, 25, and 30, such as Deng Xiaoping, obviously very elderly now, in their 80s. And there is always a transition in leadership from one generation to another one. And they've certainly been holding on, and the tragedies of what happened with the youth in 1989 that we're attempting to assemble and to demonstrate. What do you see coming soon in China? Because age alone will take care of the fact that generation will pass from the scene. Those that they are trying to groom to succeed them, they still have had a different experience, and it
That's
came out at
right.
a different time. Will there automatically be some change because of their different life experiences?
Personally, I think that's a very astute observation on your part, and I think it's really going to be relevant for the next 10 years of leadership. It's unfortunate, one of the probably as unfortunate as the massacre itself is the problem and the crisis that they're going to face in leadership because of dismissing people like Zhao Ziyang. That is going to have a significant impact on Chinese reform, just from the pragmatic point of view. But certainly, your point is really well taken about the different experiences. In fact, it agrees with mine, so of course I like it. But the idea that these people have had different experiences, you're going to have a new generation of leaders that didn't participate in the Long March, or that weren't killed by the Kuomintang in the 20s, or that didn't go to France, or that didn't go to the Soviet Union. And they are not going to have that, in a sense, commitment to this idea of permanent revolution or to the pristine model of Leninist party construction. So when you have that divergence, I think you're right. I think you're going to have an easing up, which is one reason that the Chinese in general are not panicking either on a large level. I think it's hard for Americans to understand why the Chinese didn't revolt more, and why did they seem satisfied with this? Well, as you say, they're just sort of saying, well, when Deng Xiaoping dies, he's already resigned now, and maybe he'll die, and then things will change. I think they have the same opinion.
There's two other things here that there's some ironies in history. One is that when Chairman Mao was getting near the end of his reign, and there was a fight between the old guard, Mao, and the Gang of Four, and the so-called revisionists, and Deng Xiaoping was, was part of the revisionists. In fact, at one point he was, I guess, went through rethought school and system, and he became the reform, the revisionist, and now he is the old guard.
There's a tremendous irony in that, isn't there?
Yes.
And this really only occurred in 1989. Until then, our vision, what did Deng Xiaoping made the Times Man of the Year? I mean, how much better can you get than this? And he's made all these tremendous strides towards modernization. And he has, this is the other problem, is because of Tiananmen, the real thing that he's hurt has been what he wanted to protect, which is the party. And the leadership ability of the party has been really damaged, and the Communist Party has done a lot of very good things for China. And that's what's so ironic, is that he's hurt that future ability, and he's hurt the legacy of what the party has accomplished.
Even though there's the long historical Sino-Soviet split, and China always makes a very big point out of that they do things their way, a very old civilization, and often we see in the context of those issues in textbooks that they take things and do it Chinese style, as it's been indicated. But because of the political revolution that's underway in the Soviet Union, and the Chinese are so cognizant of whatever goes on in the Soviet Union, is that going to also be a political factor in what happens as a new generation comes in China?
I think it had an impact already with Gorbachev. In fact, the timing of the whole demonstration was centered around the international attention, the break in the rift of Sino-Soviet relations, the first time Gorbachev or a leader of his position had come to China. Instead, they took all the attention for the democracy demonstrations, and there was certainly that. I'm not so sure, given if you're raised a certain way, and the Chinese have not been raised to regard the Soviets as anything but enemies, just as they often think, we have big hate. A lot of questions I get when I go to China by normal Chinese people are, well, how do the Americans think about us now? Do they hate us? And I hate to tell you this, but 95% of Americans don't even think of the Chinese, whereas they have weekly political sessions in their units where they talk about capitalist U.S., enemy here, enemy there. So in terms of the Soviet Union, I'm not so sure that they think of the Soviet Union positively. In fact, what's more indicative is when Romania, Ceausescu went down in Romania, that's the type of thing they wanted to keep secret from their people. And in fact, when it was known that he was killed, apparently demonstrations took place in workers' factories, beating of the cups, and that's really where Romania, maybe Albania, if that ever changed, would have, in some senses, even a bigger impact.
Thank you. Rodney.
Relative to how much of the world is known by the Chinese, what forms of communication are available. What does the Chinese, an average Chinese, know of the American as opposed to what the American knows of the Chinese?
Well, I think the problem in America is that we don't realize how important Asia in general is, particularly here, someplace like Idaho, where we're having increasing focus on Japan. I understand that there's 180 Japanese women coming next October to be at North Idaho campus, and they're really significant strides. And yet we're actually very ignorant about Asia in the American side. But that ignorance is slowly catching up. We are getting a lot more educated through our mass media. In China, the interesting thing is there is more and more newspaper articles, magazine articles, but it can be very, very distorted. For example, I mentioned that I took this 10-day trip with Zhu Yuhe. He turns around to me one day, he said, well, I was reading in Beijing Renmin Erbao People's Daily. He says, I hear 100 people jogged without clothes in Central Park. I said, I beg your pardon? And he says, yeah, I hear there were 100 people who took off their clothes and ran in Central Park, New York. New York, right? Is that where it is? And I said, well, this isn't a typical thing that happens in the United States. And it was surprising because what they picked to publish is almost relates on the bizarre. And they don't have a way yet to filter. Not just in the PRC, in Taiwan too. Every Sunday they have a American movie, and what gets filtered is just these B movies that you in your life have never seen here in the States. And it's terrible because there's all these Americans just hanging around the television set waiting to catch something in English so that they can hear a little bit more, one fix of English a week. And you see these actors you'd never heard of, these B-grade horror movies. Their three most popular programs in Taiwan, and when I was there, was like Three's Company and what's that, Dynasty or something. It's incredible what culture or what passes for culture does get sent down. And that's a good question because we need to think about linking up more interculturally and really giving an education. Like I said, the Chinese really think, a lot of normal people, man on the street, thinks that we may carry a lot of hate for them. The Korean War, they call the war against the United States. And we call it the Korean War. Now, isn't that interesting? You see how the perspective changes there? They focus it all on the U.S. We think of it in a different context. So we have to break down some more barriers, and we have to be a little more, I think, far-sighted in the kinds of information that we can share with the Chinese and that we should encourage to be shared.
Some parts of history, China has been more isolated than other parts of the world, particularly a country of its size. And even during Mao's reign, there was a period that was true. And then they become more involved, and we start to have diplomatic relations and trade. But after the incidents in 1989 and the massacre of the students, are they somewhat withdrawn again? I don't mean to the same extent that they were even during Mao's reign, but has there been a setback in their involvement, particularly with trade with the West?
I don't think it's really, well, we know that all the restrictions from trade have really not been all that well enforced, and Mr. Bush is real eager not to hurt that trade relationship with them. And that's why he wouldn't sign the bill to give the Chinese students protection. But I think it's probably had more of an impact on American public opinion than it has to any detriment of trade, because they can't do without the trade. They need the capital. They want to go through with the reforms if they don't have any alternative but to go through with the reform. So I don't think the trade issue on that is something that's going to be affected. In terms of isolation, publicity, world image, there's a thing with modern technology. One of the things Tiananmen showed that has not been true in any other political event in China is the power of media. And for example, yesterday the Goddess of Democracy ship by the expatriates in France has landed in Singapore. The Chinese took the rare action of having the Xinhua news agency representative in Singapore declare that they were criminals, and that they actually, might try some military tactic against the ship, which is trying to broadcast about the Tiananmen incident to their own people. So it's going to be very, very hard for them to isolate their people. The real question is, what do the Chinese people think about Tiananmen in the countryside, not necessarily in the cities?
And what do you think that is at this time?
I don't think that's so clear cut. According to scholars who have been to China in the past year, I'm going to go in the summer, so I'll be able to have my own opinion after that and talk with some knowledge. Superficially, I would say that there are a lot of Chinese who think the students went too far, and that they should have not had the demonstrations when Gorbachev was there, and that they should have broken down earlier. Now, would have they would have been pursued still by the government? I don't know. Could be likely, because they have cracked down on any kind of dissident action. It's not easy to predict what would have happened, but according to what did happen, there are people in the countryside who want reform, and they don't care about what happened to the students. So it's not such a monolithic point of view in reality in the PRC, but I got to wait till I get there, hit the trains up, see what's happening. Apparently it's very easy right now to still conduct research, because they're very glad when scholars come there to do it.
Thank you. Rodney Frye.
Could you relate, before we went on air here, we had some opportunity to visit some of your personal experiences, and I was wondering if you could relate some of those wonderful experiences you've had one-on-one with individual Chinese people as part of your research.
Well, one-on-one and everything like that. The nicest thing are my research revolves around the 1920s, so I get these elderly men. And you'll be talking to a fellow, and he'll be saying, oh yes, well, when I knew Ho Chi Minh in 1920, which indeed this one man I talked with, Sheng Chung, for example, was who was a founder of the French Communist Party at the Congress of Tours in 1920. And it was incredible to be sitting there with Mr. Sheng, and he had a Legion of Honor medal from President Mitterrand, and he himself had published a book in French in 1930 with an introduction by Paul Valéry called Ma Mère. It was an autobiography and centered around his mother as a euphemism for Chinese modernization and revolution. And it was just incredible. He would be sitting there, he would be drawing pictures, maps of Paris in the 1920s, and one moment he said that I just loved, he said, "我记得 Dada." Oh, I remember Dada. And he was around Montparnasse and all this exciting stuff that they know.
We're just about out of time, and I don't want to leave the program without letting you tell us about a Chinese artist that's come to the United States. I'm going to show some of his work, and would you tell us briefly when he's coming and who this is?
Okay, this is the work of Cao Yingyi, and Mr. Cao, who is now going to teach at the Nanjing Art Academy, has won international awards, and it's very unique. He combines French Impressionism with traditional Chinese brush painting, and the colors that he uses are just very unique. He will be here in Idaho for the month of October. Lewis Clark State College is bringing him in for the international conference, and we will take him around the state.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us. It's been a wonderful interview. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed our program. Please be with us again next week at the same time. Until then, have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at the same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by an NIC student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.